So you watched Sucrose's Basics Guide, Sucrose's. You watched Sucrose's Basics Guide, and now you're wondering, oh, Sucrose isn't plural. Possessive Sucrose. You watched Sucrose's Basics Guide, and now you're wondering what are some good teams for her to be in. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Now, we're first going to start off with this Furina, Dia, Sucrose, Benny team, because we all know how much I love Dia. So to start off, we're going to show what Sucrose does in a vape team. This also works for a melt team. And for this, we're going to use Furina, Dia, Sucrose, and Benny. Yes, Dia, because she is my best built pyro character. Of course she is, because I love Dia. So in this team, Sucrose is going to be shredding enemies' resistance to whatever element we swirl, right? Because of VV. But she's also going to be sharing the EM around to Furina and Dia and Benny, making their vapes go up. For Dia, it is going to be a reverse vape. For Furina, it is going to be a forward vape. So you kind of want to do this in a way where, like, if I want Dia to get the increase in the EM, the increase in the damage, then I'm going to make sure that I swirl Pyro, so that way Dia gets that extra 50 EM. Now, of course, once we use Sucrose's skill or burst, she's going to share EM to everybody on the team. So it's not necessarily going to only help one character, it's going to help the entire team in this instance. It is also going to group the enemies together just a little bit with her burst, with her skill. It can also, if we let it absorb, if we let her burst absorb Hydro, then it can allow Dia to get a little bit more vapes, but it's not like a massive thing, right? It can help so many times because Dia's burst still follows the rules of the eternal cooldown, so it's not like she's going to get a vape every single time anyway. Now, doing this, you're going to see that Dia is going to be able to hit 80k on vapes, 90k, even over 100k on vapes in this particular domain, which is actually fairly good. And the reason for that is if we look at Dia and Furina before we actually start our full rotation, then they're each going to have less than 100 EM. Dia is going to have 37 EM, Furina is going to have 16 EM. Once we start going through our full rotation, getting the swirls, all of that kind of stuff, Dia is going to have 256 EM, and Furina is going to have 185 EM. So their vape damage is just going to go up as soon as we do that because of Sucrose's passives. If we wanted Furina to get more damage, then what we could do is we could just summon Furina's minions first, swirl that first, so that way Furina is getting the increase in damage and not Dia. Now, while Sucrose does not help with like fanfare points, Dia's own self-healing and Benny's healing can, in their own way, increase the fanfare points enough that it's not going to like super matter. Now, like I said at the beginning, this works really with any kind of vape or melt team where you can swap Dia out and put a different pyro character in like Arlecchino. You could swap Furina out and put another Hydra character in like Xingqiu. You could do a lot of different things to allow this team to do increased damage, right? The whole point of this is allowing Sucrose to VV shred the enemy and share over EM. So this really works good if you don't have EM invested into a character like my Dia and Furina, because it allows you to get all of the EM that you need for vapes or melts from an outside source and make that enemy weaker to the element that you want. So then you can invest more into HP on Furina and Dia, attack on Arlecchino, things like that, right? It allows us to shift where we want to prioritize our stats away from EM because we're still going to have the EM that we want thanks to Sucrose. So now that we've gotten the normal stuff out of the way, as normal as you can be whenever you're using Dia, we're going to now look at using an on-field Sucrose swirl driver. In a way, so this is going to actually be a Hyper Bloom team with Sucrose being our on-field driver, with Sucrose, Nihida, Kuki Shinobu, and Xingqiu. And what this does is that this is going to be allowing Kuki Shinobu to get an increased amount of EM from Nihida's burst and from Sucrose. So we want to bring Kuki on, get her electro going, swirl it to give her an extra 50 EM because of Sucrose's passive. Then we are going to drop her burst or her skill to increase the entire team's elemental mastery. Now we want to keep Sucrose on the field after we get through the rest of the rotation of getting Xingqiu's burst going, and then of course Nihida applying Dendro and all of that stuff, because every time Sucrose triggers a swirl, we're going to increase the EM of whatever element she swirled, But when we use her skill and her burst, it's going to increase the team's EM. Nahida's EM share through her burst lasts way longer than Sucrose's. So we need Sucrose on the field to use her skill and her burst as often as we can to keep the elemental mastery up throughout the whole team. That's why we're using Sucrose, specifically Sucrose, on the field. Nahida's also off field, Kuki's off field, and Xingqiu's off field. So this works really, really well having Sucrose as our on-field driver. So to kind of show you how it works, we're going to look at Kuki's EM before and after we go through the rotation. So Kuki's EM before is 1048. So we're going to first trigger Kuki's skill, getting Electro going. We are also going to allow Kuki to take damage because I have C6 Kuki, and once you go below a certain amount of HP, you get an extra 150 EM on Kuki. So that's really, really good. So if we use her skill, we pop over to Nahida, get Nahida's burst going, go to Sucrose and swirl the elements. Kuki is now going to have 1,625 EM. That's nothing coming from the domain. That is just coming from Nahida's buff and Sucrose's buff. This is a lot of EM on our Hyper Bloom trigger. So these Hyper Blooms are going to be doing a lot of damage. And then, of course, if we had C2 Nahida, it would be even more damage, right? So it's really interesting. I also had to screenshot it because Kuki should have having that much EM is always fun. I always like seeing how much EM I can get on my characters. Now, throughout this team, throughout this rotation, Nahida is going to be getting a ton of damage. Kuki's going to be getting a ton of damage thanks to our Hyper Blooms. Xingqiu is going to be doing damage as well. It's a very interesting team using Sucrose as our on-field Anemo driver, but she is going to be doing enough damage on her own, especially if you level 90 her, which my Sucrose is level 80. With the swirl reactions, right? It's going to be smaller amounts, but they're going to stack up over time because each one of these Anemo hits is going to be swirling something, right? So it's actually a really, really good team that works together synergy. I guess this would be still considered a niche team, but it's still like a really cool, good team, right? Like you wouldn't be able to do this with Kazuha or with really any other Anemo character. It kind of needs to be Sucrose because of the elemental mastery sharing. I might have to try this team in the Abyss just to try it, because it was a lot of fun doing it in this. I need to build Xingqiu a little bit better. I could just steal some artifacts. That'll be fine. Yeah, I'll do this in the Abyss one day and kind of see how it goes. Get Sucrose to level 90 and then... Now, the next team that we're going to talk about is going to be much more of an aggravate spread team, where we're not going to be hyper blooming. We're just going to be sharing EM around to allow our Dendro and our Electro characters to do a ton of damage. And the team that I found that was the most fun to have enough damage and some healing or shielding was Sucrose, Nahida, Fischl, and Kuki. Now, Kuki does still have the full EM build. I would swap her build over to where she was doing damage, not necessarily full EM. But this is going to allow us to get some healing through Kuki just to kind of help offset any damage that we are taking. Fischl is, of course, going to be doing most of our damage, as well as Nahida. Again, all three of these characters are off-field applicators of their element and damage dealers. So this is going to allow Sucrose to come on the field, swirl the Electro, causing more aggravated reactions, allowing Nahida to get more spread reactions, all of that stuff. So again, this is another team that synergizes specifically with Sucrose being our on-field damage dealer, because of the EM sharing, giving a ton of EM to Fischl and Kuki, allowing them to do a lot more damage. Again, I would rebuild Kuki to allow her to do more damage with a good crit split and all of that kind of stuff. Probably, maybe even something like 4-piece Thundering Fury or having Golden Troop, something like that to allow Kuki to have her own set of damage, as well as that little bit of healing that we're going to be getting from her skill. It would be a rework on Kuki, and I didn't think about it at the time. Also, maybe you could run like Sniper Nahida versus a full EM build Nahida, and that could also work specifically in this team. But that's something to maybe try later on. And the last team is going to actually be a quick bloom team, where we're going to take my Chiori Alhaitham team, and we're going to take out Chiori and throw in Sucrose. Again, this is going to allow a ton of EM to go between Alhaitham and Kuki, so where it's going to increase their damage. Now, Kuki's artifacts are changing over to where she's on 4-piece Deepwoods with a full EM build on Deepwoods, allowing Alhaitham to do more spread damage. I'm also taking Araku off of Alhaitham and giving him Mist Splitter. So I am changing their builds around just a little bit, like the Araku thing doesn't work on Alhaitham unless you have a Geo character. So I had to swap the builds around a little bit. But they're still going to do a ton of damage, right? Kuki's still going to have that EM buff coming from Sucrose. Alhaitham's going to have that EM buff coming from Sucrose. Sucrose is going to allow Kuki to do a little bit more aggravate damage. It's not going to be a ton. It's mainly going to be the slight grouping, the application of Electro, so that where Alhaitham can get more spread reactions, and a little bit. This is not going to allow Sucrose to be on field. This is going to kind of take her back off field. We're mainly using her for her EM sharing, and then allowing Kuki or Farina to get a little bit more damage through the VV Shred. So this was also a really fun team. I did like this one. This is another team that I might try just to try, because it was a lot of fun. I very much like my Chiori Alhaitham team better though, so I'll probably stick with that. But if you have Alhaitham or another on-field damage dealer, where you kind of need to be like in the fray, maybe even somebody like Sethos could do it, like Sethos Nahida Sucrose. Maybe you could do something like that to get EM up. There's a lot of different things that you can do, right, with having EM sharing. You just need to make sure that you have her in a team where you need that EM sharing, right? Like, she would not go in an all Geo team or a mono Geo team. She wouldn't go in a freeze team because you don't necessarily care about the EM of the freeze character. She wouldn't go in a physical team, right? So just make sure that you're putting her in a team that wants that team-wide EM buff. Now that is going to be it for this video. Kuki has green hair. Sucrose kind of has green hair. I still kind of have green hair. And I will see you in the next one.